Valet looked at me the way people look at someone who's wandered into the wrong neighborhood, politely, but with a certainty that I didn't belong. "Ma'am, this event is for Harrington biomedical staff and their guests only." I told him I was a guest. He asked for my name. I gave it. He scanned his list twice, slowly, and then looked up with that particular brand of sympathy that's really just dressed up dismissal. "I'm sorry, I don't see you here." Through the glass doors of the Fairmont Pacific Rim, I could see my husband laughing. His hand was on the small of his colleague's back. Jess, his research coordinator, the one he'd been working late with for the better part of 8 months. He was wearing the navy suit I'd picked out for him in October, the one I'd had dry cleaned twice so it would be ready for tonight. He caught my eye for exactly half a second and then looked away. Not startled, not guilty. Just done with the interruption. I stood on Burrard Street in November rain and understood something I should have understood a long time ago. My name wasn't on the list because he hadn't put it there. I want to tell you this story properly, because it's easy to look at how it ended and think I must have been strong the whole time. I wasn't. For years I was exactly the kind of woman I used to think I'd never become. The one who kept quiet, kept the household running, kept her own work invisible so her husband's work could shine. The one who told herself it was love, when really it was habit and fear, and the particular exhaustion of a woman who has given so much of herself away that she can't quite remember what was hers to begin with. My husband and I met during our graduate programs at UBC. He was in pharmaceutical sciences. I was finishing my doctorate in biochemistry, specializing in targeted drug delivery systems. We were in the same research cohort for 1 semester, and I thought he was brilliant. He had this confidence that I mistook for competence for a very long time. We married young. I was 28, he was 31, and within 2 years we had our daughter, Lily, and I had quietly restructured my entire career around his. It wasn't a decision that happened in one conversation. It was 100 small ones, each of them perfectly reasonable in isolation. He was up for a position at Harrington. The commute was brutal. The daycare near his office was better. My postdoc could be deferred, my research could wait, my work could wait, I could wait. And I did. For 11 years I waited. What I did during those 11 years, I want to be precise about, because imprecision is how women like me disappear from our own stories. I raised Lily, yes, but I also continued my research, at home, in the evenings, on weekends when he was at the office. I built out a methodology for lipid nanoparticle formulation that he had started in our graduate years and abandoned when it hit a wall he couldn't get through. I got through the wall. I spent 3 years getting through it, and when I did, when I had something genuinely novel, I made the mistake that I think a lot of women in marriages like mine make. I showed it to my husband first. He was excited. He said it was extraordinary. He said we should write it up together. We didn't write it up together. He wrote it up. My name appeared in the acknowledgements. The paper was published in a peer-reviewed journal 18 months later. The formulation it described became the foundation of Harrington's lead pipeline compound. My husband was promoted to Director of Research Innovation. He gave a keynote at a conference in Montreal. There was a profile in the Vancouver Sun. In the photograph, he was standing in front of a whiteboard covered in equations. I recognized the way you recognize your own handwriting. I told myself it was fine. We were a team. His success was our success. Lily was 7 and still believed her father hung the moon, and I didn't want to be the one to dim that for her. I kept working. I kept finding things. I kept handing them to him, one careful piece at a time, and each time I told myself this was the last time, that I'd put my name on the next one, that I'd find a way to have the conversation. I never did. He was very good at making me feel that raising the subject was a kind of aggression, that I was competitive where I should have been collaborative, that I was undermining something fragile. The summer Lily turned 10. I found an email on his laptop that he'd left open. He was in the shower. I wasn't looking. The subject line was visible from across the room. Dinner. Tomorrow, can't wait to see you. I sat down on the bed very carefully, the way you sit when your legs stop working, and I read the rest. His research coordinator had been with Harrington for 2 years. She was 29. The emails went back 8 months. He called her his real partner, the one who understood what he was building, the one he could talk to. He told her that his home life was complicated and that he was working toward a change. I didn't say anything that night. I lay beside him in the dark and listened to him sleep and thought about 11 years. I thought about the lipid nanoparticle formulation that was currently in phase 2 clinical trials under his name. I thought about Lily's winter recital coming up in December, the one he'd already told me he couldn't make because of a board presentation. In the morning I made his coffee, I made Lily's lunch, I drove her to school, and then I sat in the parking lot of a Tim Hortons on West 4th and called my oldest friend, Margot, who is a family lawyer and who picked up on the second ring and said, without my having to explain much, "Okay, tell me everything and don't leave anything out." What she told me, gently but plainly, was that I had a problem and an asset. The problem was that 11 years of unpaid intellectual contribution to a marriage, in Canadian law, is not automatically recognized as it might be in other jurisdictions. The asset was that I had something most women in my position don't have: documentation. I keep records. I always have: lab notebooks going back to graduate school, time-stamped files, draft manuscripts with my name at the top before he revised them away, email threads where I walked him through my own methodology because he couldn't follow the math. "You need to talk to an IP lawyer," Margot said. "Not eventually, now." I also, she told me, needed to be careful. I couldn't tip him off. I couldn't let him know I was building anything. I had to be, for a little while longer, the woman he thought I was. That was the hardest part. Not the legal strategy, not the documentation, not even the loneliness of carrying it alone, but the performance of normalcy while the entire architecture of my marriage was coming down in my peripheral vision. Making dinner, asking about his day, helping Lily with her science project, acting like everything was fine while I spent 2 hours every night after they were both asleep, organizing 11 years of evidence. The IP lawyer Margot referred me to was thorough and a little frightening in the best way. She laid it out for me in a boardroom in downtown Vancouver on a Wednesday afternoon, what I had constituted a credible claim of misappropriation of intellectual property within a marital context. The timeline of my lab notebooks predated his published work by 2 years. The draft manuscripts showed my authorship clearly. There were email exchanges in which he explicitly asked me to explain the science to him, which established the direction of expertise. The question was how to deploy it, and when. "You don't want to do this in a way that looks like spite," she said. "You want to do it in a way that looks like truth, because it is the truth." In October, Harrington Biomedical announced their annual Research Excellence Gala at the Fairmont Pacific Rim. It was a black tie event. Every major name in the Canadian biotech sector would be there. The CEO, the board, external partners from Toronto and Calgary, and several American firms who were watching the pipeline compound with considerable interest. My husband had been asked to present an update on the formulation, to the assembled guests. He told me about the event 2 weeks before it. It did not ask me to come. I assumed I was going. I had attended every professional event of his marriage. I had sat at those tables and smiled and deflected questions about my own career with practiced ease. I had watched him accept congratulations for work I had done, and I had never once said anything other than, "We're very proud of where the research is heading." I found out I wasn't on the guest list 4 days before the gala, when I called the Fairmont to confirm dietary restrictions and they couldn't find my name on the reservation. I called my husband. He said in a tone that had become familiar over the past year, careful, preemptive, slightly cold, that the table was full, that it was really just a work event, that I'd find it boring. Lily was doing homework at the kitchen table when I had this conversation. She was 11 and perceptive in the way children are when they've been paying quiet attention for years. When I hung up, she looked at me and said, "He's not bringing you, is he?" I said no. She put her pencil down and said, "That's not fair, Mom." I agreed with her, and then I told her that sometimes things that aren't fair are also the last time they happen. The night of the gala I went anyway, not to cause a scene, not to confront him. I went because I needed to see it. The thing I had built being presented by a man who had convinced himself he built it in front of the people who needed to eventually know the difference. The valet turned me away. I stood in the rain for 11 minutes. I watched my husband through the glass, working the room, comfortable in a way that people are comfortable when they believe they've earned their place. Then I took out my phone and I sent one email. It went to the Chief Scientific Officer of Harrington Biomedical, a woman named Dr. Paulette Osei, who had been a guest lecturer in my graduate program 16 years ago and who I had stayed in quiet contact with ever since. I had told her 2 weeks prior that I had something she needed to see. She had responded within the hour. We had met in her office. I had shown her the lab notebooks, the drafts, the emails, the timeline. She had been very quiet for a long time, and then she said, "How long has this been going on?" I told her. She said, "I'd like to involve our legal team." The email I sent from the sidewalk outside the Fairmont said only, "It's happening now. I thought you should know." She replied 4 minutes later, "I know, we're already moving." I didn't go home right away. I walked to the seawall and I stood there in the dark with the rain coming off the water, and I let myself feel it. All of it, the grief and the relief and the strange specific grief that comes when you finally stop pretending that something is okay. 11 years of pretending, 11 years of being the woman behind the curtain, and now the curtain was coming down, not with drama, not with shouting, but with documents and timestamps and the particular power of a record that no one had ever bothered to destroy because no one had ever thought I'd use it. The next 3 weeks were not easy. I won't pretend they were. My husband came home from the gala and said it had gone well. I said I was glad. We went to bed. He didn't know anything had happened yet. He found out on a Monday morning when he was called into the CEO's office and presented with a summary of the IP review that Harrington's legal team had been conducting since Dr. Osei had flagged the concern. He called me from the parking garage. His voice was something I had never heard from him before, unmoored, genuinely frightened. He said, "What did you do?" I said, "I told the truth." He said, "You've destroyed everything." I said, "I've documented everything. There's a difference." Lily stayed with Margot for the 2 weeks it took for the initial separation to be finalized. She was 11 and she knew something was very wrong, and she was angry in the way children are when adults in their lives have been pretending for too long, and she'd had to carry the weight of sensing it. I told her the truth in age-appropriate terms. I told her that her father had taken credit for work that I had done, and that I had finally told the people who needed to know. I told her that we were going to be okay. She said, "Were you ever going to say something if he hadn't done the gala thing?" I didn't know how to answer that, so I told her the truth. I didn't know. She thought about it and then said, "I think you would have. I think you were almost ready." She's extraordinary. She's always been extraordinary. The legal process took 7 months. My husband's employment at Harrington was terminated in January, following a formal review that established, beyond any reasonable dispute, that the foundational formulation underpinning their lead compound had originated with me. The separation agreement was negotiated through lawyers and was, in the end, the least complicated part of the whole thing. He was too exposed on the IP question to fight hard on anything else. Harrington offered me a formal position in March, not a courtesy role, Director of Molecular Innovation, a seat on the Scientific Advisory Board. retroactive acknowledgement of the foundational work in an amended patent filing, which my lawyer described as extraordinary in its scope and which I found almost surreal to read, my name, in print, on the thing I had built in the dark while the rest of the house was sleeping. The compound entered Phase 3 trials in April. There are early indications it may significantly reduce treatment resistance in a particular class of ovarian cancer. I think about that sometimes. Not the professional vindication, not the patent, not even the salary that is more in 1 year than I made in the previous 5 combined. I think about the women who might benefit from the thing I made in the margins of a life that kept trying to make me small. Dr. O.C. and I have coffee every few weeks. She told me once that she had suspected something was off for years, that the depth of the science in my husband's work had always seemed at odds with his answers when she asked him questions at conferences. She said she'd never had proof. She said she was glad I finally gave her some. Lily's science teacher sent me a note in May to say that my daughter had submitted a project on lipid nanoparticles, and that it was the most sophisticated work she had ever seen from a student her age. Lily hadn't told me she was doing it. I found the note in my email while I was sitting in my new office on the 14th floor of a building in Yaletown, looking out at the water. I sat there for a long time. There are things I wish I'd done differently. I wish I'd understood sooner that love and self-erasure are not the same thing. I wish I'd had the courage earlier to put my name on my own work. Not for glory, but because the record matters. Because the record is the only thing that can't be revised by someone else's telling of the story. I made peace, slowly, with the fact that I wasn't weak for waiting. I was afraid, and afraid people are doing the best they can, and the best I could eventually got me here. My husband and I finalized our divorce in June. He's moved to Calgary. I don't know much more than that, and I've found that I don't need to. On the wall of my office at Harrington, I've put up one thing, not a diploma, not an award. It's a page from one of my lab notebooks, the original one from 2019, the year I finally broke through the wall he couldn't get past. The date is at the top in my handwriting. The methodology follows. And at the bottom, where I always signed my entries, there's my name. Just my name, in ink, dated, witnessed by no one but me and the work itself. It was always enough. I just needed the world to finally catch up to what the record already knew. I used to think that patience and passivity were the same thing. They're not. But it took me a long time to understand that, and for years the two were tangled together in me in a way I couldn't easily separate. What I've come to understand, sitting with this, really sitting with it, the way you do when a chapter of your life ends and you're left sorting through what was real and what was a story you told yourself to get through the day, is that the outcome wasn't luck, it wasn't fate, and it wasn't some invisible force deciding it was finally my turn. What happened was the natural result of a long chain of choices, mine and his, and the way those choices accumulated over 11 years until the weight of them could no longer be ignored. His choices were what they were, taking credit, letting me stay invisible, deciding that the convenience of my silence was worth more to him than the truth of what I'd contributed. Those choices had a logic to them, and the logic was this: he believed there would be no consequences. He believed I would stay quiet indefinitely. He had no reason to believe otherwise because for a very long time I gave him none. And that's the part I've had to be honest with myself about. Not to carry guilt, I've let that go. But to be clear-eyed, I made my own choices. I let things go. I told myself it was love, it was partnership, it was keeping the peace. And it was some of those things. But it was also a failure of nerve that I've had to name plainly before I could move past it. What changed wasn't my circumstances, what changed was me. I made a decision, somewhere in the second year of knowing what I knew, that my integrity mattered more than my comfort, that I owed it to myself, and honestly to Lily, who was watching all of it with those quiet, perceptive eyes of hers, To stop participating in a version of events that wasn't true. Not to blow everything up for the sake of it, but to be someone whose record was honest, whose work was documented, whose name was attached to what she'd actually done. That decision required something I didn't know I had. It required a kind of moral seriousness that isn't glamorous. It's just sitting down at a desk at 11 o'clock at night when you're exhausted and frightened, and organizing your lab notebooks because the truth deserves to be findable. It required the discipline to keep going when it would have been so much easier to let it rest. And it required, in the end, the courage to send one email and stand in the rain and trust that the record would hold. It held. Lily asked me once, near the end of all of it, whether I was angry. I told her I was for a while, but anger without direction is just weather. It happens to you. What I wanted was direction. I wanted to take what I knew and point it somewhere useful, somewhere that could change something. She's 12 now. She submitted a science project on lipid nanoparticles, and her teacher didn't know whether to give her an A or a scholarship. I don't think she'll ever let anyone put her name in the acknowledgements when it should be on the cover. I don't think she learned that from me telling her. I think she learned it from watching. That might be the part I'm most at peace with. Not the patent, not the title, not the office on the 14th floor. The fact that the person who watched me do this is my daughter, and she saw that doing the right thing, carefully and honestly and without burning everything down just for the satisfaction of it, is actually possible. That's enough. It always was.